Ladies and gentlemen, I request you to please take your seats. We will begin our next session in just a minute. I request the panelists for this session to kindly take their place on stage. And since we've had a bit of a problem with this in the last two sessions, I will request you to please either switch off your cell phones or turn them to silent mode. And it would be greatly appreciated if you maintain silence during the session. Yes, I'd like to request the panelists to take their places on the stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we now begin our session, Book Launch, Education Policies in Pakistan, Politics, Projections, and Practices by Shahid Siddiqui. Our panelists for this session are Ameena Saiyid, Shahid Siddiqui, and A.H. Nayyar. Our moderator for this session is Haroona, Jato. I will take this opportunity to introduce our moderator for this session, Dr. I would like to request the audience to maintain silence during the session. Thank you very much. I would also request people in the back to close the doors now. Dr. Haroona Jatoi lives in Islamabad, where she's a senior policymaker in the Ministry of Education, Government of Pakistan. Presently, she is a member of the Advisory Committee for the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. It is indeed my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shahid Siddiqui, presently serving as Vice Chancellor of Allama Iqbal Open University, but also have experience of working at LUMS, AKU, GIK, and Lahore University of Sciences. He had studied at Toronto University for his doctorate, University of Manchester for Masters of Education, and University of Punjab for Masters in English Literature. Dr. Siddiqui's strong area of interest are educational management, leadership, and change. An accomplished researcher and author of several books will present today his latest book, Education Policies in Pakistan, Politics, Projections, and Practices. I see it as a true reflection of his scholarship and commitment. The book presents holistic understanding of policies development since creation of Pakistan to latest policy of 2009, inclusive of all related factors, including politics involved in preparation and implementation of educational policies. I very strongly feel that this book has filled a huge gap in public policy development in education by presenting a comprehensive and comparative analysis of all areas and stages of education. This book can be a great reference for education policy planners, researchers, and institutes of education and research, not only in Pakistan, but all over the world. Thank you very much. Dr. Shahid Siddiqui.
Thanks, Haroona. Well, let me start with the rationale of writing this book and what was the process in writing of this book. I have served as an educationist in this country for the last, I think, 3 decades, more than 3 decades, as a teacher educator, researcher, and now as educational manager. And I believe that there is a very close relationship between policy, planning, and development. And when we talk of policy does a very important job by identifying the areas which are very important, and then a strategy how to cope with those problems, and it comes up with a plan. As far as Pakistan is concerned, we see a number of documents in Pakistan, starting from 1947, the year Pakistan came into being, And the last policy was 2009 policy. And in between, we see a number of documents like the 1959 Sharif Commission report, 1969 proposals for education policy, 1970 policy, 1972, 1979 policy, and then 2009 policy, which means that there are ample documents. And I personally think that the problem lies in the implementation. When I looked at the literature available regarding policies, I could find a few papers and articles that dealt with certain themes or some specific policies. Some people worked here in Pakistan, including Dr. Tariq Rahman, who is sitting here and who has always been a source of inspiration for me. Interestingly, the person who was very active in 2009 policy, Mr. Javed Ali, he's also sitting here. So I think there are some very important references who are present here. So I was telling you that when I looked at the literature available, I could not find a single book which was comprehensive in nature, which looked at all the themes and which looked at all the policies. So I thought that there is this gap, and I should do that. I should do that job. And then I started looking at different policies. And interestingly, those policies were not available anywhere. And I was telling Haroona that I contacted somebody in Educational Planning Academy, and I was in Lahore. And the person said, "Why don't you come over and we can make photocopy for you?" Anyhow, I'm thankful to a number of friends and libraries to provide me the relevant documents. And I thought that this book should be different from the literature which is already available. And you will read it and you will see that whether I'm successful in that objective or not. What I tried to do is that I tried to do a thematic analysis of policies. For instance, female education. What was proposed in 1947 document, 1959, 1969, 70, and across the policies. And I analyzed, then take any theme, religious education, special education, higher education, primary education, teacher education, etc. So reading one chapter about a theme will give you that view, a very comprehensive view, what was happening throughout these periods. Secondly, I personally think that we cannot analyze policies in isolation because these policies were being proposed, designed, and implemented in certain contexts, political contexts. So there is a chapter in this book that talks about the socio-political context of all these policies, which I think is very important to get a fuller and comprehensive picture. Each chapter takes a theme and then sees it across the policies. But this is not a book which just compiles these policies and lump them together, because each chapter has a useful section that is discussion and analysis. So there is analysis of what was happening in that theme across the policies. Each chapter has a summary as well. So I think that this book would be very useful for the students, for research scholars, for people working in development in NGOs, development sector, and those. I'm not, supposing that the person who would be reading it would have a scholarly background. Anybody who doesn't have any scholarly background in education can easily, comprehend, because the language is very simple, and being a teacher, I try to make things very simple. So this is a very, brief summary of what is there. Before I end, I would just like to go through the content list so that you can have an idea about this book. The first chapter is about education policies, rationale and process. The second chapter is the socio-political context of education policies. Chapter 3 is education policies, vision and ideology. Chapter 4 is literacy. Chapter 5, universal primary education. Chapter 6 is higher education. Chapter 7 is female education. Chapter 8 is language issues. Chapter 9 is technical and vocational education. Chapter 10 is special education. Chapter 11 is religious education in madrasas. Chapter 12, curricula and textbooks. Chapter 13 is teachers and teacher education. And chapter 14 is, that is very important chapter, about implementation. Here I discuss in detail the challenges and put forward certain doable recommendations. In the end, I would like to thank Oxford University Press, especially Dr. Ameena Saiyid, who has been always very supportive and very positive, and my experience of publishing with OUP was very pleasant. My previous book, Language, Gender and Power, was published by them, so I opted for OUP, and thanks to everybody, the whole team, they have been very positive. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahid. Now I would request A.H. Nayyar, an accomplished scientist and retired from Quaid-e-Azam University, and then worked with several other universities such as Princeton University, LUMS, as well as he also headed Ali Institute of Education in Lahore. He is a freelance critic, and he has also, his area of interest is education, its management, curriculum and teachers. I would request Dr. A.H. Nayyar to present his thoughts about Dr. Siddiqui's book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Education is a very vast area, and you start discussion in education, you can easily get lost into all kinds of issues that come in. It is good that we focus today on the education policies. And it is good because education policies deal with macro issues rather than micro issues. And these macro issues are those that are easy for the state to handle, and therefore state promises that it is what the state is going to do about education. As Dr. Siddiqui described, his book is partitioned into various issues that education policies raise. In fact, from the very first education policy to the very last education policy, nearly all these issues have been handled by the education policies with various recommendations and targets. What comes up, and he does that by actually focusing on each issue and telling you what each policy promised and what each policy conceptualizes that particular problem about. The interesting thing that comes out of reading this book is that the targets that education policies set for themselves actually barely change over all these 60 so many years. The targets have barely changed simply because the previous policies have never ever actually achieved their targets. So the targets remain just a kind of a constant thing. Everybody comes up and says, we will achieve 100% literacy in so much time, we will achieve universal primary education in so much time, and we will do this and we will do that. And all of these targets that are set by governments, changing governments, they are barely achieved, and therefore they are always present in nearly the same form and nearly the same thing. The targets are somehow in all these policies, targets are set on a long-term basis. So if a government has prepared a policy for say 5 years or 10 years, it wouldn't fix up targets for the year after the approval, for 2 years after the approval, for 3 years after the approval. It will always set targets towards the end of the policy. What happens is, by the time that end comes, the government is not there. And therefore nobody is there to be accounted for the failure of the policy. And after a year, I mean, this actually becomes the proverbial race of the hare, that after a year or two, when you don't achieve the targets, you say, okay, but we have plenty of time, we will go and achieve those targets later on. This is somehow has become a pattern, unchanging pattern from the beginning to the end. So Dr. Siddiqui's book actually is remarkable in this respect, that brings out this very important characteristic of policy making process in Pakistan. I think the conclusion that I draw from this is that policies are made not to achieve targets very sincerely, but actually to have a feel-good thing, says a good feeling that we actually have a roadmap now, and we show to the world that yes, we have an education policy and that we will follow this. It is perhaps even in the minds of those people who make policies that these targets are never going to be achieved. I know the framer of the 2009 policy, Javed Hassan Ali, is here, and I'm sure that when he was making the policy, he was extremely sure that the policy will fix up targets which will be achievable, but then of course before the policy could be actually finally formulated, he knew that this was not going to be so he left the policy making process at that time. The other important thing is that there are still a few things that are achieved that actually are implemented. And it is interesting to see what those things are which get implemented. Number one, the thing which gets implemented is privatization of education. Now, why is privatization of education implemented? Simply because that absolves governments of their responsibility to provide education to people. Because this is a primary responsibility of the government to provide education, and by shirking this responsibility, by passing on the burden to the private sector, they promise that they would expand education to this and this level, but then not by themselves, but with the help of the private sector. And another important characteristic of the policies has been something which has been very injurious to us, which is that 4 or 5 or 6 drafts of the policy come in, and they all get improved after every draft, and they give you a feeling that the policy is extremely good. And suddenly, at about 7th or 8th draft, a new chapter just comes into the policy that nobody had ever worked on before. And this new chapter in the education policy is about Islamization of education. And then everybody else is so scared of handling it that nobody takes it off. Nobody takes it off the policy. Nobody says that there is something wrong over here and there is the other thing wrong over there. And this Islamization of education comes in and becomes a permanent part of the policy. And this then guides the entire policy. And that is the reason we see so much of chaos in this society. I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Dr. A.H. Nayyar has highlighted quite important points, and I am sure the audience would see it in true perspective, the way Dr. Shahid has presented his argument. Now, last but not the least, as they say, I would like to request Ms. Ameena Saiyid, who is Managing Director of the Oxford University Press, basic architect of Islamabad Literature Festival and other festivals in the country. awarded by the Queen of England as OBE, and awarded by Government of France for her contribution to art and literature. Ameena Saiyid has promoted the cause of education and published extensively in this field. Ameena Saiyid, please.
Thank you, Dr. Haroona Jatoi. You know, when Dr. Shahid Siddiqui sent me the manuscript of this book, it was probably the first draft, I think, and I was reading it, and I was really struck by one of the chapters, I think one of the earlier chapters, in which he writes about the educational conference. That was the first one in 1947, when Quaid-e-Azam was still alive, and the education policy that was formulated by the then education minister, Mr. Fazlur Rahman, who was actually from East Pakistan. And I read some of the proposals that were made in that policy, and I was struck because I thought it was actually prophetic what Mr. Fazlur Rahman wrote. He advised in his address that our first and foremost concern must inevitably be a determined and vigorous attack on the formidable problem of illiteracy and its evil consequences. He then goes on to say that the existence of a large bulk of illiterate population constitutes a grave menace to the security and well-being of the state. So in 1947, he was concerned about how the security of the state will be affected by illiteracy. And I think that is actually what we have been seeing in the recent past. That policy actually, again, I found it, of course, there were issues with it because, again, the problem of studies, you know, Islam crept into that policy. That has been a fixed agenda in every one of the 9 policies that have been formulated since 47 to 2009, as Dr. Siddiqui has very succinctly mentioned in his book. But what I found very progressive and very liberal, and again, written in 1947 but applicable today, in which again this policy says that the use of broadcasting, slides, gramophone records, documentary films and other scientific methods should be used to introduce mass literacy. And you know, this is what I have been propagating from every forum that I get a chance, every platform, because what I feel is that we really are facing an emergency in education. And we cannot wait to build new schools, to train teachers, and to then improve the quality of school. I think we have lost that time. Now we have to use the media, we have to use television programs, we have to use lectures on televisions, we have to use aids, computer applications, and you know, programs such as Khan Academy, or we have to use all these modern technology to promote education, while of course building and the quality of our schools and improving schools. I just want to say that Dr. Nayyar mentioned that how the government has abdicated education to the private sector. Yes, indeed, they've done that. I do feel, you know, now 40%, if not more, of children who are studying in schools, for children of school-going age, are now going to private schools. And private schools of all kinds, not just the expensive ones, but now there has been a boom, a huge explosion of low-cost private schools run by small entrepreneurs who are opening schools. I know that we are working with 300 such schools in Islamabad alone, low-cost private schools, and parents are sending their children to these schools. They're taking them out of government schools. There's this gradual shift that is taking place from state to private schools. And I asked somebody, I said that, you know, you're moving your child. This was in Karachi. I went to a school on the 2nd floor of a building in Aurangi. And it was a one classroom school run by the housewife who had used one room in her flat, again for an income. And there was nearby was a very large government school with a huge compound, lots of space, and parents were shifting their children to this one-room classroom on the second floor. And the reason was, they said that here our children get attention. The teacher and the principal, the same person, knows every child. She spends every minute of her time teaching them, whereas that's not the case in a government school. So actually that's the reason that these private schools are now flourishing and growing. And I think the government is beginning to feel a little insecure, because they are now actually interfering with the private sector education in different ways. They're trying to control fees, and they're trying to control the intake of students. I mean, that's another discussion. I'd rather not go into that right now. But I feel that a lot has to be done, and I feel rather than trying to control the private sector, all they have to do is improve the quality of state schools. Why would parents pay an arm and a leg to send their children, or any fees? My driver's children go to a private school for the same reason that I've described. But all this would stop. All the government has to do is improve their standards. And how do they improve them? I think, of course, the first thing I think that they have to do is to change the examination system. The examination system is based on rote learning. You have to learn the textbook board books by heart and then reproduce them verbatim if you want to pass the exam. So the examination system has to change. The questions have to be open-ended, and children should have the freedom to compose their own answers. And of course their information and knowledge has to be checked, but also their analysis, their thinking. They don't have to reproduce what they have read in a book, but they should actually express themselves. So I think that's the first change that has to be made, the examination system. I think I'm not going to say much about curriculum. I think it's all right. And there are, of course, weaknesses in it, but the curriculum is actually, it's a guide, it's a document that gives you a framework. It's not something prescriptive. So I won't say much about the curriculum. I think textbooks, absolutely they have to be changed. I think textbook boards should not be publishing textbooks, because they publish textbooks in a monopoly, and it is only competition that drives up standards. And students, or rather schools, should be free to choose textbooks themselves. Government schools, they should not be forced to use government textbooks. And of course, professional development, teacher training. If the government can somehow get its act together, there have been 9 policies, but the important thing is, have they been implemented? And which is what Dr. Nayyar said, that a government frames a policy and they think they've done their job. By the time it needs the implementation time, it happens in the next government. And instead of implementing the policies of the previous government, they decide to formulate their own. I mean, every government, the Nawaz Sharif government has announced 2 policies. The Zulfikar Ali Bhutto government had 1. I mean, there have been 9. Although I must say, I noticed that the Benazir government did not have an education. They did not publish. But anyway, that's all right. I think all the education policies mean well. There was this element of Islamization which was introduced particularly in Ziaul Haq's time, when Islamic studies was taught in every subject, not just in Islamic studies, but also in history, English, Urdu. It was included in all that. But otherwise, on the whole, we can just take the best parts of every education policy. It's not difficult to again spend so many resources in framing it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ameena Saiyid. She has highlighted important aspects of quality of education, and the most special point which she made is deregulation of textbooks policies, which is a long debate and would require a lot of time for the government to accept it and practically implement it. My own request to Dr. Shahid would be at this point that when he decides to publish the second edition of this book, he should also look at in context of Article 25A and devolution of education to the provinces, and also this status of policy making, how it should be done, and time. And yeah, can I please make an announcement, quick one, and then you can comment about it. Yeah, time is already up.
No, I have one, because it's a point of personal explanation.
Okay, can I just make one announcement? Yeah. The book, this particular book which is launched just now, is available at the back of the room. You can have the privilege of signed copy by the author. And Dr. Javed Ali Saab, if you can make a very brief comment. Yeah.
My name is Javed. Personally, I wish to make a point of personal explanation. I did not expect Dr. Nayyar and Dr. Shahid to have forgotten that I am not the author of the 2009 education policy at all. I was involved with the education policy formulation process, and I left in 2007 because of my differences with Javed Ashraf Qazi. And in that, and I wrote the pre-policy document, as you know, the white paper on education, and it did not have a chapter on Islamic education. It did not have a chapter, and I did not, because the comment that I wish, I speak without the benefit of having read this book, but I do not know whether this book addresses the issue that education policies in Pakistan, the vast majority of them, there are 2 or 3 noble exceptions, are all driven by agendas other than education, agendas and dogmas of a variety of hues, and not concerned with education. We invented an ideology in 1949, we are still suffering from that, and that sometimes pervades our education policies without concern for actual objectives and outcomes that we expect from the education policy. So I am not responsible for the 2009 document, which was authored by a Canadian consultant.
Copies of the books are available, and I accept his explanation, because I should have corrected this, that he was not author of the policy. I was then at the Ministry of Education. And books are available, please take.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us this session. As our moderator for the session has already mentioned, Dr. Shahid Siddiqui's books are available at the back of the hall. If you buy one of these books, Dr. Shahid Siddiqui is also going to be signing the books for you. So those of you who wish to buy these books, kindly proceed towards the back of the hall.